You talked a little, this may be a difficult question for you to have perspective on, but, you talked about how kind of US business, their sense of things is shifting, and the need for them and also US policymakers to kind of recognize more what's gone on in China. And I wonder whether you had any sense when you were talking with either some of the Chinese executives or the policymakers that you talked to there of a recognition of what changes they might also need to make to sort of tamp down, certainly some of the rhetoric and some of the tension, that's caused by things like, Laura, you mentioned, there's a denial that there's been rampant theft, and yet, that's been considered, well known in, both US and European, business and policy circles for, 15 or 20 years. The forced joint ventures that then, walk away with technology and that kind of, some of that kind of stuff that is at the heart of, from a US perspective at the conflicts. I don't know whether, do you get any sense from that, or is that just something that would have been too difficult for you to get a sense of when you're talking with Chinese policymakers and business people of, a recognition that those are in fact real issues that need change from their perspective?
It seems that what we mostly heard from both the embassy and the officials that we were talking to in China was that there was not a theft problem. I mean, that seemed to be where they were coming from. We talked to two sort of officials who represented the Chinese government, and one who really was one of the founding, principles in the Chinese and in today's Chinese government. And they both said that this theft is something that the United States has really made up or manufactured, or if there was some, that it was somehow, just sort of rogue companies behaving badly, that this was not state sponsored. I think what we've seen over the years and since our film came out were several more examples of Chinese government and Chinese military intrusions into, there are now several cases that are now going on in the Justice Department. There was not a willingness to own that. Yeah. And there has not been from the Chinese government a willingness to acknowledge that. I think that, a lot of people have said, and that I've talked to about this have said, well, the United States is a bunch of hypocrites because you guys, stole a whole bunch of stuff too when you were founded, and you stole a bunch of stuff from the British, and, don't stand on some high horse and pretend like you don't steal anything, and, or that you don't have spies all over the world doing different things too. It's a good point, and it's a valid point. The question is the question at hand for everybody is whether or not the United States and whether or not United States Americans can accept a world where America is not number one. Mm-hmm. And I think that threat terrifies people. And what does it mean when China is a more of a global dominating powerhouse than we are? That's hard for Americans, and that's hard to move forward and think about a world like that, because if China, we were in, one of the places going through the stalls where people sell a whole lot of things in China. And, there were some Turkish businessmen in this place where they were buying, faucets and sinks and things, the handles for sinks and whatever. And they, basically they sat there and they said, we said, do you care about the US trade war? They were like, no, not at all. And we were like, do you care about the prices, or do you care about the US dollar? They were like, no. They were like, we do not care. No, it doesn't matter what the United States is doing. What matters to us is our relationship to China, and our relationship to the businessmen and business people and business women in China. And I thought that was so telling, because so much of the world is now shifting toward its relationship to China rather than shifting toward its relationships to the United States. I don't know. I'd like to be able to fast forward, half a century and see what happens.
I was just going to say, on the question of sort of, how much does the Chinese government recognize all of this? That's obviously increasingly difficult for the Western press as journalists get pushed out of the country. But, I mean, one thing that was certainly clear during the time that we were there and in the reporting that we did is that, while the Chinese government puts on a unified front as this sort of single party, there are reformers, there are more conservatives inside of the government. It's just not always in the public sort of face the way it would be in the United States. So, it was clear there were folks that were, pushing China on this question, but on the other hand, Xi is very much a sort of nationalist and sort of China first kind of leader. And so, to the extent that, we have any vantage point, that's, what's had much of the upper hand lately, as, Xi has taken power and sort of consolidated and closed off other voices inside of China.
And I wonder, this is my last question, and if anybody out there has any further questions, there's nothing right now in the chat. If anybody else does have one, please put it up now because we're about out of time. But so much, there's obviously very deep, policy conflicts that are going to have to be resolved no matter who's in charge in both countries. But I think some of what has been difficult from the Chinese perspective is, as you say, this sort of sense that, we, and particularly this administration, and, given some of the language used by President Trump, the Bannon, nationalist language that, is seen and perceived as very demeaning towards China, very insulting in many cases. And that's obviously been heightened by his language around the coronavirus, that whatever tensions there were already over trade, that has obviously not helped. And I wonder whether any of you have a perspective of, if we do end up, as the polls would indicate now, and if they are correct this time, with a Biden administration, even if the policies remain fairly tough on trying to, address some of these issues more openly, if there is a different level of rhetoric, whether that will help get to a better, develop, more of the kind of perspective you talked about earlier, where, we kind of have to learn to, to deal with them. We're not going to just be able to sort of squash them and keep them in a box. Do you think that will make much of a difference? Any of you have a sense of that?
I'll say, I think one of the interesting surprises that we found, and it sort of, as we started off the film, actually at the very beginning, was this idea that the Chinese actually thought working with Trump was going to be better for them. He's a businessman. He gets it. They had a lot of, as it was said, high hopes for being able to build that relationship. They had a very good relationship in that Mar-a-Lago meeting at the beginning. So it was interesting to see that, I think they've been caught by surprise at the temperature level that this has gotten to. And so my guess is that they'd be looking to try and, reduce that temperature level. I think there's some benefits, and I expect that, if in fact, as you're saying, we have a Biden administration, I think the first step will be to try to reduce that temperature level. But there's no question, as I think Emma was saying before, is like there's bipartisan support. There has been growing bipartisan support for a stronger, firmer stand against China's trade practices. Whether that then is used as a all-encompassing war against this, power play, global power play, I think that's a much different question. And frankly, you look around and you see all the flashpoints, Taiwan, you see what's happened in Hong Kong, the South China Sea. It's going to be very, very difficult and pretty tense going forward, whoever is in the White House.
Yeah, I would agree. And, whatever the world looks like in, was it 2050, you mentioned, it's going to be a very different place than it is right now. Who knows what direction it will take. But okay, I think that I'm just checking to see if there are any, nope, there are no more questions in the chat room. And I think I've run out of my questions, and we've run out of time in any case. So this was great. I really enjoyed talking with you all. And again, we really thought you did a great job with the piece. So thank you all for being here. Thank everybody out there who's watching this. And that's it, I guess.
And thank you all for a very
you.
interesting discussion. As a business reporter, my whole life, it was very fascinating, especially that the companies want it both ways. Yeah. So. But thank you all. We'll end the meeting now, and we really appreciate it. Take care, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.